Hello and welcome to the Gonzales Mitchell Show. I'm Clay Mitchell. Patrick is out doing Patrick things today. Notwithstanding, we have a great guest on our show today. It is Chris Burnett. He is a former member of the Marine Corps, Semper Fi, and is running for the congressional seat, in the 6th Congressional District. How are you doing this afternoon, Chris?
Clay, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today.
Now, for those that have yet to be introduced to you yet, what is your background? Where are you from? And tell us about your military career.
Sure. And I'll try to keep it short. I just recently retired in February of this year. I did 22 years on active duty for the Marine Corps, and I served across multiple duty assignments in the United States and 5 deployments overseas. I spent a majority of that time as a lawyer, but as a lawyer in the Marine Corps, you also serve in leadership roles, and then you also have a chance to advise both commanders and work on planning teams. So over the course of my time, I focused on international and operational law, which meant I was advising commanders, leading Marines, or participating in planning teams focused on tactical and operational level planning. And that has taken me all over the country, and I've been blessed because I've had an opportunity to start a family. They have traveled across the country with me. They put up with me being away. At one point, my wife and I calculated, I think I've been away from the family almost 6 years between schools, training, and deployments. So I've had a phenomenal career, and I enjoyed every second that I had on active duty. And it came to an end, though, when my wife had said, no more deployments, no more moves. So then we made the decision to stay here in Montgomery County in Gaithersburg. And when that decision was made, I realized I needed to do something. I couldn't stay on the sidelines. So the first decision I made after active duty was to run for Congress.
So we now understand that your wife outranks you. She calls the shots and has veto power. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
That's great.
And while we're talking about, her background is fascinating. You talk about the sort of the classic American dream. She came here from West Africa as a political asylee. That was following a military coup in Guinea. There was a lot of violence. So her family qualified for political asylum. She came here when she was 16 years old, learned to speak English in a U.S. high school. And then we met while I was in law school, and she became a naturalized U.S. citizen. So yes, she does outrank me, and she has a much more interesting story than I do.
That's great. Now, you made it to the rank of lieutenant colonel, were you in what's called the JAG Corps, or is that something different?
It's similar, but the Marine Corps, you're a line officer first, which means you compete with other ground officers for promotion and assignments. The Department of the Navy has a JAG Corps, and Marine judge advocates fall under the Navy JAG Corps only for accreditation and training. So you have to submit every year that you're in good standing with your bar, which for me was Pennsylvania. And then you have to submit any other training requirements that they require. But we're not technically a JAG Corps.
Gotcha. I knew I'd like you. You're a fellow lawyer, so we got to stick together here.
We do, right.
There is something going on in the news right now about redistricting, like what they're doing in Texas. Yes. Other states have threatened to do it. And I think there's been noise here in Maryland about doing it. Now, I don't know how much more gerrymandering can be done, but I don't even think it could be made worse. But if the Democrats want to do that, they could go ahead and do it. I think it's advantageous to Republicans. We used to have in Western Maryland a fairly safe Republican seat there when Roscoe Bartlett was in and the like. And now things have sort of changed a bit. What's your view on what's going on with that? Do you think that redistricting is going to happen before your election?
Well, I'll start with, I think any attempt at gerrymandering is misguided. It's been going on for years, and I think both parties are culpable in terms of having taken advantage of a majority at the state level and trying to do this. So I don't like the idea of gerrymandering. I can tell you Maryland is one of the worst examples of gerrymandering. There was the case in 2022 where they described Congressional District 6 as extreme gerrymandering. And thankfully, it was reapportioned to now it is a competitive district. But you're right, Roscoe Bartlett was basically gerrymandered out of his position.
Right.
It was not a terribly competitive district. And then following the 2020 census, and that new district that was drawn was successfully challenged. And now, really, the Congressional District 6 comes down to the unaffiliated voters in Frederick and Montgomery County, because it's a fairly even split when you start looking at Garrett, Allegheny, Washington. Those are very, very, plus 20 or even higher on the Republican side. And then as you get down into Frederick, which is genuinely purple, and Montgomery is deep blue. But when it all plays out and you look at the numbers, it's approximately 55,000 unaffiliated in Frederick and about 30,000 in northern Montgomery. My concern is that in response to what's happening in Texas and what Governor Newsom is threatening in California, that Maryland will, whether as a symbolic gesture or as a way of shoring up CD6, they'll reapportion it and make it an impossible district for a Republican to compete.
Nothing can look crazier than I think it's the second and the third congressional districts that wind around in some crazy way. And to say that Republicans shouldn't redistrict or attempt to redistrict anything is hypocritical in my view.
Because and that's true. I wish we could get to a point where this wasn't an issue, but I do think part of what's happening is we are trying to correct past wrongs. Is this the best way to do it? It's not always the best way. You play the cards that you're dealt, and I think this maybe will bring about the change that was needed, and we can reset around a fairer map, because you start looking at the total numbers across some states where there are 0 Republican members, and yet there's 40 to 50% of the population that are Republican. And you start looking at some of these states that have just gone absolutely over the deep end in terms of how they've set things up or rigged it to their benefit.
The unaffiliated voters, or independent voters, people call them, has grown significantly over the past 20, 25 years.
It has.
Last I looked, there's about 950,000 unaffiliated voters in Maryland. There's 2.3 million Democrats and 1 million Republicans. That being said, the unaffiliated voters can't vote in the primary, so you're concentrating on winning the Republican primary.
That's right.
What's your competition out there on the Republican side, and how do you differ from them?
And that's a good question. So right now, Robin Ficker has declared for CD6. He's a perennial candidate. He's running on very much a pro-Trump, I don't quite know how to characterize his campaign, but he's very much running a strong pro-Trump campaign that I think is effective in certain parts of the district, but I don't know that it will resonate into the general election for a real competitive campaign. Neil Parrott still has a exploratory committee open. I've spoken to him, and I think he's looking at the idea of possibly running, and he's also addressing some of the remnants of the 2024 race. But beyond that, there's not anyone else that's declared at this point. And that was also why I stepped in early. Coming off active duty, I need to establish name recognition. I have to demonstrate my viability. And most importantly, I have to articulate how my experience on active duty, whether it was various duty stations, advising commanders from the battalion level on up to combatant command and at the Pentagon, translates to why I would be a good congressman. That skill set is not widely understood by folks that have not been in the military. So my job is to jump in early, start articulating why I'm a viable candidate and why my military experience is prepared me for this particular role. And that is to lead by example, to set the conditions for other people to succeed, and ultimately to bring the values that I hold dear and that were certainly present in the Marine Corps, and that is to bring accountability and integrity back to this congressional race.
Now, Western Maryland, I always say, is like Southern Maryland, is like the Eastern Shore. We all share the same conservative values, I want to say. What are some of the problems out in Western Maryland that are unique to Western Maryland that need to be addressed by new leadership in the Congress?
I think it starts with just infrastructure and opportunity. Those folks out there feel like they're being overtaxed, overregulated, and there's just absolutely no opportunity. Whether you're trying to start a small business, run a farm, or even just provide for your family, you just can't seem to get out in front of the new fees, the higher taxes, the over-regulation. And when I've gone out there to visit with folks, they'll tell me that, if they wanted to start a small business, whether it was at the county or state level, the amount of red tape is prohibitive. They can't get themselves even over the threshold to start a business, let alone to make it viable in the time it would take to get all of the permits and approvals and all of the things that are required just to provide for your family. So if you go out there, you'll have a chance to visit with folks and realize that these are just hardworking families that want opportunities that they should have, and that they find themselves on the wrong end of some misguided county and state level policies that need to be addressed. And the message I brought there is that I would try to change the narrative at the federal level. What I mean by that is I can't necessarily reach into a county or state level policy, but I can change the narrative. We can put pressure on the state. We can put pressure on the county to say, look, there are federal funds or federal opportunity available. If you can just get out of the way, we can start helping the constituents across Western Maryland.
Out in Western Maryland, I know that they are rich in minerals, in gas, natural gas. But I hear all these stories that, wow, look at those mountains. We're going to put a bunch of windmills up there. We're going to get federal subsidies to do it.
Yeah.
With the new administration, I think the federal subsidies are starting to dry up. Notwithstanding that, there's going to be a big push to put solar and wind out there using federal money. The state has taken away, I think, economic opportunity for Western Maryland to use their natural resources to create jobs and create an economy out there that can grow. What are your feelings on those types of situations, those economic issues?
I think common sense needs to prevail here. I think you've seen the state take on some vanity projects in the name of being the California of the East. You can claim all the wind farms and solar farms you'd like. It doesn't produce the amount of energy that's needed to be competitive in the current economy. The fact that we have power lines cutting across Maryland to deliver energy from Pennsylvania to Virginia is absurd. We quite literally have opportunity passing through Maryland and not benefiting Maryland in any way, shape, or form because we can't get out of our own way. We're now paying for approximately 40 to 45% of our energy needs right now. That's going to jump to almost 80% when we let a few of the other coal-fired power plants go offline. And the thought is that we were going to replace all this capacity with solar and wind. Well, not only is that not providing for Marylanders, but let's think about the opportunities we're missing in terms of data centers, AI, and quantum computing. So not only have we failed to provide for Marylanders in providing organic energy sources and opportunity associated with that, we're not in a position to compete with the growing economy, the AI quantum computing economy that we're not in a position for. So this is more than just an inconvenience and high electric bills. As a state, we're not going to be competitive over the next 3 to 5 years if we can't allow ourselves to take advantage of the energy intensive requirements with AI and quantum computing.
Along those lines, we have the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission that has oversight on construction and planning for nuclear energy and nuclear power. Out in Western Maryland, it seems to me that it is a ripe area to locate those smaller modular type of nuclear power plants to power data centers and the like. What is your view on nuclear energy as it pertains to the sixth district?
I would certainly favor anything that's going to create opportunity. Now, I know there are safety concerns, but nuclear power generation is one of the safest forms of energy production. If we could allow ourselves to cut the red tape and we could make it so that it fit in with that community, that it wasn't disruptive, that it didn't create a risk or any kind of a threat to their livelihood, I would 100% support that. Because what we really have to start looking at is what are the opportunities that are generated whenever you produce this? Then what opportunities are you creating by sustaining it? And then what other opportunities does it afford whenever you have organic energy production? And we're seeing right now, Pennsylvania is an energy exporter, and their economy has benefited from that. And then you look at Northern Virginia, where they had deregulated the development of a lot of these technology corridors, and they're booming. Loudoun County is one of the fastest growing, wealthiest counties in the country, in large part because of how they've allowed opportunity to flourish and develop in a way that's sustainable and in a way that is is aligned to the local residents and their needs. So I would certainly consider that, as well as other forms of production, so that we can help ourselves.
I wanted to shift gears back a second because
Yeah.
for some reason I forgot to talk about the general election and your Democratic opponent.
Yeah.
Distinguish yourself from your Democratic opponent and how you think you're better suited to be in Congress and represent the 6th district.
And I'm glad we circled back to that, because this really is, you couldn't contrast us anymore. I've spent my entire adult life serving as a lawyer in the Marine Corps, setting the conditions for other people to succeed. Embracing the leadership tenets of the Marine Corps and the things that I've learned throughout my upbringing, working in a blue collar environment, working as a carpenter, raising a family as a single income military family. Those values have instilled a sense of selfless service. And so when I came off active duty, I didn't see this as anything other than an opportunity to correct some things that have been done poorly, some things that are not being done well, but most importantly, to set the conditions for other people to succeed. And I mention that because when you start to look at us individually and professionally and our families and our backgrounds, they've been incredibly successful, and I commend them for their success. But it makes her and her husband, who was the former congressman of CD6, completely out of touch with the needs of most people in CD6. As a family of 6 raising 4 children in the Montgomery County Public Schools, whenever you see changes in the price of eggs and milk, and you start looking at the cost of registering a vehicle and getting your emissions done, that has a direct impact on my family. So I would look at those things, whether at the state level, which some of them are, or at just how the federal government is trying to help families. I would look at that from a very personal standpoint of saying, I'm experiencing what most other families in Western Maryland are experiencing. And I don't think that her background allows her to have that same perspective. And then if you start to think about what you learn as a Marine Corps officer, as a father of 4 children, that you've been moving around all over the country, you realize that there are unique challenges that families will face. And I think the benefit of a military family coming to Montgomery County and having had the benefit of living in Florida, California, and elsewhere, I'm going to bring a sense of urgency to solving problems for CD6 residents, whether it's folks that have been impacted by federal employment, whether it's been the lack of opportunity, or it's the slowed development because of fees, regulation, and permitting. I'm going to look at that from the standpoint of, how can I set the conditions for families to succeed? And it brings me back to my wife earlier. I'd mentioned, part of her American dream was she wanted to own a business. So whenever we came here, as we started to get settled and we knew we were going to make Northern Montgomery County our home, she looked at opening up a laundromat, something that she thought she could immediately help sort of contribute to the local economy, something that would be an interesting challenge for her. And when she started to look into it, it was going to take over a year for her to get the permits and the approvals. And how can any family that's putting their kids through school, competing with rising costs, then take advantage of that entrepreneurial spirit that really has defined the American experience? How can you do that whenever you're looking at over a year of sunk or lost costs due to state and local regulation? So when you start looking at her background and her lived experience versus mine of service, family oriented, and problem solving, you really couldn't contrast us anymore. And then, as we talked about offline, getting things done in Congress oftentimes is about being creative and hardworking. That's exactly how I'm going to approach this campaign, and that's exactly how I would approach my time in Congress. I'm there solely to set the conditions for other people to succeed. I'm there to advocate for CD6. Right now, CD6 is not getting any of the benefits of a lot of the growth and development that other places are benefiting from. And it's because Maryland's an automatic no vote. What you need in Congress is someone that can advocate for the interests of your constituents, to stand up for the people that you're representing and actually then negotiate for their benefit. Think about all the opportunities from the big, beautiful bill and some of the other legislation that has been presented that we're just on the sideline for. We're basically getting the secondary benefit of things that are being passed without our participation. So I would go there following the midterms with one goal in mind: set the conditions for other people to succeed and to take advantage of the economic opportunity and growth that we've been basically missing out on because we haven't been at the negotiating table and nobody has represented Marylanders, and certainly nobody has looked out for CD6 residents.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Burnett, you have a very deep background, I guess it is, through the military, all of your experience with your family, going around, being a lawyer. You have a compelling story, my friend, and we wish you all the luck in the world. However, I look at that little clock on the wall, and it's time for us to bring this to a conclusion. I want to have you back anytime you want to come on, talk about any issues you want. But until then, oh, I meant to ask you, what's your web address?
It's just burnettforcongress.com. So very easy to find. Please come by, sign up for the newsletter, or sign up to volunteer. But thank you.
Great. I wanted to get that in before we had to say goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick, wherever you are. And Chris, it was a pleasure to see you and talk to you. Please come back on our show again. Reach out if you ever need anything else that you want to discuss. We'll be happy to have you back on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clay. I look forward to coming back.
Great. Thank you.